Okay, Bengals, Chiefs. This should be an electric game. Both of these two teams are awesome. Both of these two quarterbacks are awesome. We're going to be talking about Joe Burrow, the Bengals offense, how it matches up against the Chiefs defense, and then in my next video, I'll do the other side of the ball and give my final predictions. So here, what you see on the screen, this is where each of these teams rank in certain categories in terms of PFF grades. I know people say it's hit or miss, but I still find it a fascinating tool to look at. And you look at, the Bengals offense, according to PFF, amazing at passing and receiving. Those are, according to anyone who's watched Cincinnati, they would agree with that. Pass blocking has been not the best, which again, that's very true. But the bright spot is for Kansas City. They don't have the best pass rush. They do cover very well. Although I would say is that when you have a, mediocre pass rush going up against a bad offensive line, typically that creates a lot of pass rush. If it's a bad pass rush versus a bad offensive line, the bad pass rush typically wins. And the Chiefs pass rush isn't bad. It's just not elite. Meanwhile, for the running game, it seems like there's no clear advantage. The Bengals right around mediocre, Chiefs just a little bit below mediocre. So no clear advantage there. Now what I want to do is, instead of talking about the season as a whole, let's talk about that first time these two teams played each other. So first, these are the box score stats for the Bengals, and obviously the headliner here is, Joe Burrow, 30 for 39, 446 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and also Jamar Chase, 11 catches and 266 yards. 3 of those 4 touchdowns were his. So those two guys just completely went off, and that's going to be part of what we're going to talk about in this video is, once we get into the film, got a decent amount of data to get through, but once we get into the film, that's going to be a big chunk of what we talk about is how can Kansas City not get destroyed like that, like they did last time. Also, I guess worth noting, running game, fine, but not spectacular. Now going over here, this is the PFF grade for all of the Bengals offensive players in that football game. So usually you're going to have success when you have a receiver with a very high grade and a quarterback with a very high grade, and that's what happened there. Also, left tackle Jonah Williams having quite the day himself. Over at the bottom, you do have a couple of offensive linemen relatively low, but still, it was a very good offensive day for Cincinnati, of course, and you can get away with a couple of offensive linemen not having a star day if the majority are playing well, and if guys are getting open in 1.5 seconds, what's really the difference? Meanwhile, for Kansas City, you notice that there actually are some defensive linemen at the top of this list who graded pretty well. Chris Jones, of course, he always has good days. He'll probably be able to get into the backfield a couple times in this playoff game as we would expect. But at the bottom, it's a lot of coverage guys. Some corners and some safeties not having their best days. So that's a big thing that obviously they will just have to do better at this second time they play. And one of the ways you can do that is by what scheme you use, because I find this to be a very interesting situation for Cincinnati. So here we go. I don't know quarterback stats versus man or zone. If there's a way that you can get that, I'd love to have it, but I don't know a way to get that. So instead I'm using this, which is I can find a way to get wide receivers stats versus man and then versus zone. So that's what I'm going to be using here. Just to understand the table, all the way to the left, Chase, Higgins, Boyd, those are the 3 top receivers for Cincinnati. And then the 4 categories you're going to see is their PFF grade versus man coverage, and then their yards per route ran versus man coverage, then PFF grade versus zone, and yards per route ran versus zone. I always like to have, the PFF grade, the guys who grade it and say this is, what we think is happening, this is how much value we feel to be the case, and then also just a stat that's set in stone, so that way we can kind of look at that and say, okay, that's what's actually happening. That's the outcome. Couple of things will jump out at you. First, Jamar Chase's difference between man versus zone. Way better versus man than versus zone. Yards per route ran is nearly 4 when it's against man. It drops down to 2.3 when it's against zone. PFF grade also drops down a decent amount. Meanwhile, for T. Higgins here, his numbers are almost the same across the board. So man, zone doesn't really matter for him. And then finally, for Tyler Boyd, you kind of have the opposite of Chase, although not as dramatic. He gets better against the zone, 1.26 yards per route ran versus man, 1.62 versus zone. So for Tyler Boyd, he might be the guy to come into play when you're playing zone coverage. He'll have a bigger day when you're playing zone than when you're playing man. That might be in part because against man, it's usually T. Higgins and Jamar Chase that get the ball, but also his PFF grade goes up when he's against zone, and that doesn't take that into account as much. So yeah, Jamar Chase actually has the second most yards against man, only behind Cooper Kupp. So that's worth noting. And to me, this clearly tells me one thing. I'm playing as much zone coverage as I can if I'm equally good at zone and man, right? That just seems obvious because, yes, Tyler Boyd will be a little bit better against the zone coverage, but Ja'Marr Chase has a huge jump when he's in man, or you could play man and try to double Ja'Marr Chase, but you cannot just play one-on-one against Ja'Marr Chase, which, again, this is kind of one of those things where look at a lot of analytics to determine, hey, here's this thing that we obviously already know. One last interesting piece of data before we get into the film is Cincinnati's pass frequency over expected in certain games. This is it for the entire season, including the postseason right here. Probably the most important bar to look at is just the one at the bottom. That's just all plays. So pass frequency over expected, just to give the quick explanation, although you probably can understand it. It's just looking at every single situation and how often do you throw the ball over what the average team does. For example, on first down, the average team passes the ball, looks like about 51% of the time, and if the Cincinnati Bengals pass the ball 48% of the time, that's 3% less than expected. So over the course of this season, Cincinnati has a pretty average passing versus rushing attack, which has been my criticism of Zach Taylor and the Bengals throughout the course of especially early on this season. And it's funny because people are now saying, oh wow, Jackson, you're an idiot. You criticize Zach Taylor, but his team is in the the AFC championship game. But my counter to that is like, no, his team got a lot hotter and played a lot better once they started doing exactly what I said they should be doing, which is pass the ball way more. Because in that game where they went off against Kansas City, look at these numbers jump. Watch how, look at, all plays now goes to 14% over expected. It's one game, so you're going to get bigger variances, of course, but it's still amazing. On 1st and 10, it went from -3 over expected to 22% over expected. That's just huge and a huge difference, and it kind of goes to show it's like, okay, when they do say we're a passing team, we're going to make that the way our offense operates. They're a significantly better team, and really it was this game that kind of caused them to start doing this one and the Baltimore game were the two that made them say, okay, let's start throwing the ball consistently, and I have to imagine they'll do it again, which is bad news for Kansas City fans. All right, finally, film time. I know some people just want to watch the film. I find all of this stuff interesting. I think you have to use it all together. You have to use the analytics as a part of it, but you have to watch the film as well, because I still do always maintain the best way to learn about teams is to just watch them play, and especially if they played themselves before, you'll get to learn a lot about just how guys match up against each other, what schemes we'll probably see. So let's talk about zone versus man, because as I said early on, Kansas City should play a lot more zone than man coverage in this game. But the issue is that, for the most part, they're not the best at zone coverage. They are more of a man coverage team. On this play, it's going to be a cover 2 zone, and you have Ja'Marr Chase, who's going to just run into a gap right there. Watch how, right when this play begins, it's a good concept to get Chase open. Sure, you can run these kind of things. As you see, Burrow is going to be able to hit Chase on this, but then Chase also just somehow turns this into a touchdown because he's weird. Ja'Marr Chase can just do things that no one else can do. So I'm not saying this is going to happen every time. Here's another one where it's going to be just a quick pass to Ja'Marr Chase, and he's going to break a couple of tackles that he has no business doing, and he's going to find a way to pick up way more yards than he should. Ja'Marr Chase is going to get that. I don't think that that's a zone versus man thing. I think that's just Ja'Marr Chase, what he does. I don't think you scheme how to tackle Ja'Marr Chase. You just hope that your guys tackle him and accept the fact that they probably won't every single time, because that would be impossible. My main point is stuff like this, where you're going to see that when Burrow is able to have time, he's able to hit those wide open pockets in zone coverage, which just makes things very difficult. This one is another one where this is just not spectacular defense. This is just a blown coverage by Kansas City. Ja'Marr Chase gets a big touchdown. So when you're playing this zone-heavy team, scheme, you have to be good at zone coverage, and they're just not the best at zone coverage. So that's how Cincinnati was able to have success even against the coverage that they typically aren't as good at. You actually look at the two teams that Cincinnati has already played in this postseason, and they are zone-heavy schemes, which is why we haven't seen one of those Cincinnati, 400-yard Joe Burrow performances, even though he's played well in them. The reason why guys haven't gotten as open typically has been from the zone, and it did still even happen in this game at times. Right here, it's a zone coverage play, cover 3. You see how this concept can work. Really, those over-the-middle routes are the ones that should be effective. Look at how when Burrow takes the snap, you see right here, there is an opportunity to make this throw. If you make it right now, this could be a completion, but it's tough. I mean, there's a couple of Kansas City players who are right in the way, so if Burrow misses this throw, then it's going to be incomplete or maybe even intercepted. It's a difficult play that ideally you don't want to have to make. But since Burrow doesn't make it right then, he has to try and look for something else to happen and gets sacked. So that's kind of the thing, is in zone coverage, sacks can happen a lot more frequently because if you don't make the throw exactly when you're supposed to, you'll probably hold on to the ball for longer, meaning the pass rushers get more time to try and run over and tackle you. So that's an aspect, and again, you get a couple of sacks, those can derail drives. That even happened in this game that the Kansas City Chiefs defense still got lit up in. This one's going to be another zone coverage play, and watch what's going to happen here. Burrow takes the snap, and you see right here, basically no one is open. Well, the check down is open, but again, a check down is a win. You run up, you make the tackle, let him gain some yards. Quite frankly, you have Patrick Mahomes. It's hard to beat Patrick Mahomes by throwing checkdowns. You're going to have to get some splash plays. You see, no one else is really open. Kansas City, I mean, okay, there's guys who, if you had like a drone, you could drop the ball on them. But from when Burrow is standing, there's not a good angle to make any of these throws. He could take a chance, but do you want to take a chance? Probably not. So instead, Burrow ends up getting hit as he's throwing the football. Ends up getting rolled incomplete there. So that's just another aspect of all of this, is you play zone coverage, you can slow down the Bengals offense. Now, again, like I said, the issue is the Chiefs aren't very good at doing it, so it's kind of a classic dilemma. Do you play what you're good at, or do you play what they're bad at, basically? Do you play to your strengths or your opponent's weakness? And to me, you just look at a couple plays and say, I think you play to their weakness. Because, like, look at this one, where it's going to be Jamar Chase on a one-on-one matchup with no safety help. Well, there is a safety deep, but he won't be getting over there in time to help. And look at how Jamar Chase is just going to not even really get that much separation, but he can find the ball. I mean, he has such a great awareness of where the ball is. And on top of this, Joe Burrow is so good at hitting him. So the reality is, if you want to just sit back and play man coverage, well, you're going to have to find a way to stop number one, and that's not going to be very easy to do. And so I think the constant thing that's going to pop in people's heads is, okay, well, what if you just double Jamar Chase? Isn't that something you can do? Think about San Francisco, who did it, against Devontae Adams against Green Bay. But a couple issues with that. One, San Francisco mostly doubled Adams in zone coverage, whereas this is in man, but you can still double him in man. But if you're going to do that, well, then you have to have a guy who can account for T. Higgins. Remember that other guy who's also like really good at whatever coverage you throw at him? Here's the play. It's, again, same concept, same play. Almost looks like it's the exact same play I showed you last time, but it isn't. This is going to be T. Higgins instead of Jamar Chase. And again, Burrow takes the snap. It's a one-on-one matchup. He says, all right, let's throw the ball to Higgins, since the safety was looking over to Chase, and you're able to pick that up. So you could play cover two man. That might not be the worst strategy in the world, actually. I don't hate that. But even if you do that, you're still dealing with Jamar Chase in a one-on-one matchup. He just can't run deep to get you open. He'll have to do some other stuff, which he did, in that play to set up the game-winning field goal against Tennessee. That's what happened. So there's no right answer. There's no easy way to stop Joe Burrow. There isn't. Joe Burrow's amazing. He's, I think throw for throw, he's been the best quarterback in football this season. And so this is my final prediction. In the first game, Cincinnati scored 34 points on 9 drives in the first game. That was 3.7 points per drive, which is absurdly high. Like, currently, the team that has the most points per drive on the year is Kansas City at around 2.8. So that's almost a point per drive higher. But again, in one game sample sizes, you'll see some bigger differences. Kansas City on the year gives up 2.14 points per drive. Cincinnati scores 2.40 points per drive on the year. Although, again, kind of like we talked about, they've become a much more pass-heavy team and score a lot more when they do that. I think they'll do that in this game. I think Kansas City will have some way of saying, okay, we're going to play more zone, trying to make things more difficult. I think there is a world in my mind where that works and they're able to have some success against Cincinnati. But my prediction is that Cincinnati will have success against this Kansas City team, even when they're playing their zone coverage. I'll say 3.0 points per drive on 10 drives in this game. I'm expecting a really good offensive day from the Bengals. But yeah, that's just what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.